Hi, and warmly welcome to the first webinar on tools for circular business growth. First, on the slide, there are instructions on how to enter Menti, where we hope you answer the first question of the day. These Train the Trainer sessions today and the next ones on 1st and 8th of June focus on introducing various tools as part of the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook. That is a step-by-step toolkit for companies to go circular. And these tools could be utilized when you guide and advise companies on how they can apply circular business model principles for growth purposes. In addition to tools, we will also focus on how you can help companies in identifying their circular needs and what issues and practical questions you could take up when discussing with companies. Our aim is that you can support your network of companies in their growth and with implementing new circular business models. Many of you who participate today might already work with circular economy at an advanced level, and to some of you, these business models might be more new. Therefore, if you wish any background information on how companies can get started with circular business models, at Nordic Innovation website, there's now a new video out on these fundamentals and the next webinar coming up on Tuesday next week, 24th of May. And all these webinars focusing on the fundamentals and the Train the Trainer sessions, they will be published at Nordic Inno website after the webinars. Next slide, please. My name is Hanna Törmänen and I work for Nordic Innovation. We are under the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is the official cooperation body for the 5 Nordic countries. I want to show you this picture, the vision for the Nordic countries for 2030, decided by the 5 Nordic prime ministers. The Nordics should be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. And this by working also towards a green Nordic region, especially by circular and bio-based economy. So the vision for the circular region is clear for the Nordics, and we have 8 years to deliver. And with circular business models, companies can step by step and concretely contribute to these climate goals and remain competitive and grow at the same time. Therefore, we're very happy that you're participating in these webinars, spread the information and support the companies, and on how circular business models can be good for business and good for climate. Next slide, please. These are our teams. The webinars are organized in collaboration with Accenture in the Nordics and Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. And during the upcoming hour, please raise if you have any questions, and also let us know if there's anything you would need to know more of to support the companies in your network. There's a Q&A function for that. Now I will hand it over to Sofia.
Thank you so much, Hanna. We at Accenture are so excited to host this session and webinar series together with you. My name is Sofia Forsberg, and I'm part of the Accenture Sustainability Strategy team in the Nordics, here based in Stockholm. And I'm going to be the moderator in this session and looking forward in taking you through the next hour together with my colleagues. The session will be recorded and can be found on Nordic Innovation's website the coming days. To warm up and give people an idea of who is participating, I would like you to go to menti.com if you haven't already. I think that the link will be posted in the chat as well, and enter the code that you can see here on the screen. So I see that many of you have already answered, which is really good. And I can see that we have a quite broad audience, but with the majority of the people in the advisory. And I think that this broad group illustrates that circular economy is applicable to a wide range of organizations. We go to the next slide. Then we want you to answer what you what your expectations is. Oh, sorry, I mean the next event. Yeah, thank you. What the expectation is of today's session. So I see that the answers are starting to pop in. So learn how to apply circular economy principles. This is something we will cover from our circular economy framework. Learn about circular business tools. This is also something that we will cover. And we definitely hope to inspire on how to take this forward. And we will have the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook as the foundation and background for this session. So this is also something that you will learn more of. So I think that we are covering all of these aspects in this webinar and the coming webinar. So thank you for taking your time and answer. So please go to the next slide. So we will jump into today's agenda. So today I will start with introducing you to the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook, which is the framework and background for these webinars. And then I will hand over to Anna Tundevold, who is our Nordic Sustainability Strategy Lead at Accenture, and she will introduce you to our Circular Economy Framework. After that, Hanna Karlberg, who is a circular economy expert and working with technology, innovation and sustainability at Accenture Nordics, will take you through step-by-step hands-on exercises on how you can support other organizations or your own organization in the transformation towards circular business models. And at the end of the session, we will have a Q&A. So please be active and write your questions in the chat along the way, and we will try to answer as many as possible by the end. So if we move to the next. We have 3 webinars in this learning program, Train the Trainer, in front of us. And the methodology and tools used in the webinars are based on the Nordic Circular Economy Playbook, which is a hands-on asset that helps companies explore how to pivot to circular economy. The playbook combines circular methodology and know-how with practical examples as well as applied tools and framework, which will be presented during the 3 webinars. So the playbook follows a 5-step approach, and each chapter, as you can see here, is addressed with each step. And we will begin in today's webinar with step 1 and 2 by presenting how to define a circular vision for a company and how to identify and assess what opportunities and business models that are applicable and how to identify what value they can capture. We will then, in the second webinar, move on to how to assess what capabilities and technologies that are required for the identified circular opportunities, looking at what kind of technologies and capabilities that the organization have today and where the gaps are. And finally, we will look into how to define a roadmap. We know that there are a lot of barriers for employing circular economy, so it's important to identify these barriers and address them in a roadmap on how to overcome these. So this is a high level of what the webinars will bring. So if we move to the next slide, we will go into today's session. So the purpose of today is to provide you with an understanding of a circular economy framework and how the circular economy playbook and toolkit can support companies in the circular economy journey. By the end of this webinar, you will have the tools to support organizations to identify and prioritize circular opportunities, estimate the value potential of these, and describe the value proposition. So with this, I would like to hand over to our next speaker, Anna Töndevold, who is our Nordic Sustainability Strategy Lead at Accenture, and she will present to you the Circular Economy Framework.
Thank you, Sophia, for that introduction, and hi everyone. It's really good to be here and to host this first session with you and also follow you throughout this journey. Maybe a short introduction is also that I was part of writing the actual playbook and spent a lot of time in exploring and defining the circular economy opportunities and frameworks. So I'm really happy to take any questions that you might have. You can add them in the chat or contact me also afterwards. So let me spend the next couple of minutes in taking you through the very fundamentals of circular economy and the frameworks that will guide you through this process. So I think the next couple of minutes will be very fundamental for you as you will approach the different steps that Hanna will introduce in this session and also in the coming session. So first of all, I think we all know that we're over-consuming above the Earth capacity, and we're being very wasteful in doing so. So the whole notion of shifting to a circular economy versus a linear economy is to understand how can we do more with less? How can we protect the resources and how can we avoid overconsumption and waste? So in order to explore those improvement initiatives that we need to do in order to have a sustainable consumption, we choose to look at the linear value chain by scrutinizing where we can avoid unnecessary waste and inefficiencies. So the first framework that I want to introduce you to is the framework of 5 inefficiencies or 5 wastes. And although that we're seeing how the knowledge is increasing around circular economy and the linear economy, for many, waste in the linear economy is typically associated with the end of life disposal. But what we really want to highlight with the framework that we're presenting here is the fact that there is waste and inefficiency across the entire value chain, from where we start in designing the product to how we use the product and to how we dispose the product. I think this is really fundamental to understand how we can avoid wasteful behavior. And let's just look at the 5 different wasteful behaviors that we typically see. So it starts with how we design our products, with using unsustainable materials, with using materials that cannot be repurposed or fully regenerated. So this is a wasteful behavior or an inefficient behavior from the start that will avoid us later in the circle to regenerate and repurpose products. The second waste and inefficiency I want to introduce you to is capacity. So right now, we have a lot of underutilized capacity in the products and the assets. And what that means is really that we are producing more products and assets than we need. So how can we optimize capacity? By optimizing use and optimizing the number of assets that we produce at the market. The third inefficiency is not fully utilizing products to their fullest possible working life. So this is a waste in a way that we can use products and materials for a longer period of time. And we're typically discarding products because they have outdated functionality or parts break. So we're wasting product life cycles. And then at the end of the life of a product life cycle, when we can't use the product and where we've used the end of life, it's also ways to discard the product and not see the full value potential of integrating the embedded value in the materials back into the circle. And I think this concept is fully acknowledged. But really broadening the concept of inefficiency or waste across the full value chain. And the fifth concept that I want to introduce you to is also that because of these wasteful, inefficient behaviors across the value chain, it also means that we're not fully exploring customer engagements across the full value chain. How can we engage with the customer and bring more meaningful experiences and services to them? So that's the fifth concept. So I think this is a really structured way to see how the linear value chain is inefficient and wasteful. Obviously, it's a simplified version, but it helps us categorize the major sources of waste. So then if we go to the next slide, what is it that the circular economy is offering us as a response to this? So similarly to the inefficiencies that we introduced, we also look at circular economy across the full value chain. And corresponding to the 5 inefficiencies, here we also introduced the concept of 5 circular business models. So again, it's a simplified view, it's a framework, and it really helps the business, the user to structure their thinking of what are the circular opportunities that exist. There's obviously sub business models beyond these, and you could also combine them, but having this simplified framework really helps guide the thought process of what are the initiatives that we can initiate. So if we think about the first circular business models, it's addressing how we use resources, reforming the use of resources. So using circular inputs rather than linear inputs. So how can we design products with materials that can be repurposed, but also how can we design products so that they can be more easily repurposed? How can we make sure that we use modular design so that we can repurpose parts of it or maintain parts of it? So I think this business model really sets the foundation for a successful circular economy across the full value chain. We spoke about that we're not utilizing capacities and products to their fullest capacity. And so the second model that we introduce you to is the sharing platform, where we really look into ways to optimize capacity and use. Instead of everyone owning their own asset, can we find ways where we can share and therefore increase the use? We might not need to use a product for its 100% of a working day or throughout the entire process. So how can we share and optimize the use through sharing platforms? The third circular model addresses the fact that we discard products before they reach their end of life. So how can we extend life cycles with product use extension, maintaining, repairing, reselling, to really then address the inefficiencies of discarding products before they reach their end of life. And then at the end of the cycle, how can we recover value in waste? How can we introduce waste back into the circle by upcycling or recycling? And then the fifth business model, it addresses the unexploited customer experiences. So offering products as a service. It really taps into the fact that a customer doesn't necessarily need a product. It thinks about the value that the product can bring. And for that purpose, we don't need to own a product. The entire notion of shifting from selling products to selling services is really about selling what's valuable, and it shifts the ownership to the producer, and it shifts the incentives to make the most out of the product, the asset, because that's how you can capitalize on it the most. So this is how we connect the inefficiencies in the linear model with the circular opportunities. And if we go to the next slide, by tapping into inefficiencies, this directly translates to an untapped value potential. So what I really like about the circular economy is that it makes business sense. by doing more with less, it means that naturally we will have a positive bottom line impact. So let's look at the inefficiencies and the waste as an opportunity. And if again, following the circle from the start of a product life cycle about how we can substitute wasted resources and how we can monetize on capacity and how we can monetize on lengthening the life cycles and recovered embedded value. If we look at this from a global perspective, we did an assessment and we realized that the untapped value potential from the linear model can translate into a $4.5 trillion globally by 2030. And translating then this to the Nordic context, this could be up to $140 billion by 2030 in the Nordics. So by doing more with less, there is a positive business impact. And that's what the circular economy offers. Better for the environment, better for business. And with that, I would like to hand over back to Sofia.
Thank you, Anna. One important message that I take away from what you said is that circular economy can be addressed in multiple ways, but thank you for illustrating how it can be simplified by analyzing inefficiencies and meeting them with the 5 business models. So over to Hanna Karlberg, circular economy expert at Accenture. Hanna will help you understand how to use exercises from the Playbook Toolkit to address these untapped value potential and inefficiencies. So warm welcome, Hanna.
Thank you, Sofia. Really nice to be here, and just a little bit of context and introduction also is that I have also been part of running this kind of workshops. So it's really exciting to be here. And now we will, as you guys mentioned, look into how this can actually be applied and taken from perhaps more of a strategy to action. So I think we can actually jump into the details on the next slide. So first off, to decide their vision for the circular economy, organizations and companies, they need to understand what's happening outside, I mean, macro trends and their impact, but also then to tie this to their internal operation and perhaps also then review their business strategy. And when it comes to macro trends, there is a set of questions that organizations need to ask themselves to understand this. First off, it's important to understand what changes occur in business-to-business consumer or customer behaviors, what kind of sustainability commitments that you are actually making, and what kind of commitments that the customers are actually making, because that will also influence you. Then it's important to understand what changes actually occur in access to scarce raw materials. Maybe there is actually something that you won't be able to access in the future. What regulations could have an impact on your operations? What new technologies could be relevant for the business? Then after sort of compiling this, it's also important to look outwards and understanding what or which of your customers' industries that you expect to see the highest demand for circular and sustainable products, services, or solutions. And then in turn, what opportunities this could actually bring to your company. Then when you've done those first 2 steps, it's also important to review this internally to understand to what extent this actually impacts or influences your business strategy and how that business strategy actually addresses the trends and their implications. Then it's also important to understand how the strategy could be updated to make this comprehensive. And we will soon also look into those different exercises and what those could look like. But one key thing here to also keep in mind is that it's crucial to have cross-functional teams with a quite diverse set of skills, but also the mandate to actually drive change. because otherwise it's quite hard to go from, you know, just sitting at a table and discussing and talking about strategy to real change. We can jump to the next slide. And what I want to highlight here and what we've done to make it a bit easier to follow through these exercises that I will now go through with you guys is that we're going to follow a case example. And in this case, we have a large truck manufacturer who are providing transport solutions in the medium to heavy duty segment. And what they do is to sell trucks, buses, and truck components to business customers. We will soon get back to this, but this could just be important to keep in mind and also something to, you know, understand the exercises and the different examples a bit better. We can move to the next slide. So here we then have the first exercise of this workshop series that you could then run. And the first step is, as I've been touching a bit upon, to define the overall vision. And then for each exercise, we have, you know, a proposed timing and a proposed set of tools to make it happen. And just important to keep in mind here, of course, those times are proposals, and those could be, you know, maybe for some cases you need more time and for some less time. So that is, of course, something that you will, of course, need to then tailor a bit depending on each situation. But the first task then is to define the vision. And based on market trends and the company's overall strategy, then the participants are basically asked to fill in some parts of the business model canvas. They're asked to describe the long-term vision and the desired position based on market trends and the overall company strategy. And then also to reflect a bit on the customers, the required customer relationships, the channels the organization could use to reach those, and also what competition that the organization actually see on the market. And as I mentioned, we have here then the business model canvas, which is this little screenshot you see here on the right-hand side of the slide. But we also have the first chapter of the circular economy playbook as two key tools here. And if we just jump to the next slide, we could zoom in a bit on what this could look like for our case example. In regards of time, I won't go through all the details, but just as an example, the vision statement could be something like bringing more sustainable and recyclable materials into the company's product offerings. And then we have here in the example also some answers or some thoughts about the market. And the first part is regarding the customers. Then we have regarding customer relationships, customer channels, I mean, how you could reach those customers, and also competitors, which are then Nordic and European truck manufacturers. So these are basically what we want to, this is the target state of the first exercise. Then I think we can jump to the next slide and the next step, because it's, according to my personal opinion, this also gets more and more exciting the further we get down to the exercises and the ideation. So what we want to do as a next step here is to screen opportunities and seize their value. We can jump to the next slide again. So first off, to screen circular opportunities and then of course also understand how big their relative value is, the organization then starts by identifying sources of waste across the linear value chain, which is what Anna showed you here before. And here we have some key questions, and we will soon also look into the exercises here as well. But there are some key questions, and the first one is related to identifying sources of waste. And then a key question is basically then, okay, what are the key sources of waste and inefficiencies in your company's value chain? It could be, as we've been discussing a bit, unsustainable raw materials, hazardous manufacturing byproducts, unsustainable energy sources, and so on. There's a lot of different examples here. Then as a second step, we also want to identify sustainable circular business models that could be applicable to do something about this. So then the key question is, which sustainable and circular business models would be the most relevant to address those waste streams and inefficiencies, and how we could do this. And we will also come back to an exercise on this, so it will be a bit more clear in a few minutes. And then the final thing here is also to assess the value, especially if we have some different alternatives. We of course want to go with the one bringing most value. And that we need to answer then the key question: what kind of benefits do you expect to get from these new business models? How large are they in quantitative terms? It's also, of course, important to understand the qualitative side of it. And here we speak about revenue generation, cost savings, brand enhancement, and risk mitigation. But if we jump to the next slide and the first exercise as part of this then, and that is basically to understand and identify the inefficiencies and customer pain points across this linear value chain. And as Anna mentioned here, we've chosen this linear value chain as, that is typically what we've seen at least before, so that is quite easy for people also to relate to. So here, the participants, they are asked to write down top of mind inefficiencies and waste and customer pain points across this value chain. Then they are asked to map those top 3 inefficiencies and pain points across the value chain to see, okay, where are they actually? So then they take the sticky notes and place it on a piece of paper or a whiteboard. And then we also have a group sharing. And here it's been part of those, some of those workshops. It's been quite good discussions, and especially when you have different participants representing different parts of the ecosystem, for example. Here we use sticky notes and the template for the linear value chain. And here, of course, as I said before, the timings here for, how much time you spend individually in organization-specific groups and in the full group sharing, that is, of course, to be tailored a bit depending on the cohort. But if we jump to the next slide, we can look at how this, or what this could look like for our case example. So what the participant have done here is basically then to place some sticky notes then across the value chain. And as I mentioned here, sometimes participants think that this is quite tricky. So it's really important that this is, it should be top of mind, what they come to think about first, because this is, of course, something that you could discuss for days or even weeks. But this is supposed to be top of mind and their best sort of hunch. And when if we take the first line, we have the inefficiencies. And here we have some related to the product design. One example then is that recyclable materials, they are not considered enough in product design. So that's the kind of level that we're aiming for. When we speak about raw material processing, it could be what I mentioned a bit before, that the access to scarce materials, will we really have that kind of access in the future? And that could be a risk and also a challenge. And then we have the logistics part. And there are, of course, depending on the company, a lot of different potential inefficiencies. It could be lack of return logistics or the capacity usage. Then if we look at the bottom line, we have the customer pain points. And sometimes those are a bit interlinked, of course, as well. But here we really try to look at it from the customer's point of view. And first off, we have as an example of a result from the product design. And that could be like, sometimes when you order something, you get a a super big packaging and the content is this small and the packaging is this big, and what you do then is basically that you transport a lot of air and unnecessary packaging around. So that could be one pain point. Then we also have some other examples. If we look at manufacturing, for example, there could be that we don't have any standards in measuring, which could result in difficulties to ensure data alignment across the value chain and also to compare different things. So this is sort of the level that we're aiming for here. And as I mentioned, I think it's really, if you have some different companies, for example, participating, those kind of discussions when the different companies or organizations speak to each other and sort of compare a bit here, those usually are really fun and engaging to be part of. Then if we move to the next slide, we come into the next exercise and the next focus area here. And here what we want to do is basically to take this one step further and perform a detailed assessment of inefficiencies and customer pain points. So here we have some templates, or basically a handout survey with two parts, one concerning inefficiencies and one concerning customer pain points. And here the participants are asked to work individually and complete questionnaires on their current inefficiencies and pain points, both in the organization, but here we also take as a second step that they also should try to assess it for the industry and ecosystem to sort of see, okay, how are we actually performing compared to others, because that could typically be quite interesting also to not just look inside the walls of your own organization. And yes, I mentioned we have the template. We've set aside approximately usually around 15 minutes here. And that could also be one good thing perhaps to mention is that they could, of course, also get those templates and fill them in later as well. Then we can jump to the next step. And here we are also taking a step further. And here we want to evaluate the circular adoption level of the organization. And the first thing here, there's basically two parts. The first thing is to evaluate the adoption level of different circular business models. And again, we both want to do this for the organization and for the industry/ecosystem. And then we also want to assess the relevance of each of those circular business models. And those business models could be the ones, that Anna mentioned, build to last, circular supplies, and so on. And what's quite interesting here again is to see the comparison between the organization and also the overall industry and how they assess themselves. Here we typically set aside 20 minutes. That could, of course, vary. We have a template here again, which you can see here on the right-hand side. One note here, one comment from my experience is that sometimes we participants have thought that that is quite hard to assess this. But again, we really want to emphasize that this is of their best sort of knowledge and expertise. And again, this is also why it could be good to have some quite cross-functional teams, as you have some different perspectives going into this. Then we can jump to the next slide and the fifth exercise. And now it's when it starts to get really exciting, especially to be part of and listening into those workshops. And this is when we go into the ideation mode. And here the participants are asked to prioritize and describe circular business opportunities. So what we do here is that we again use a template. And the first step is that the participants are asked to list up to 7 potential business opportunities for their organization. So it's ideas on how they could do things in a bit more of a circular way. Then they're asked to select and describe their top 3 ideas in detail in terms of the offering, what it's actually about, and the customer value proposition. Why would the customers actually like this, basically? And then we want to, of course, to bring as much value as possible and to enable those pilots, for example, to get started, that they try to be so organization specific as possible. And here we also want to encourage the participants to work in pairs and try to test the ideas, because it's always good to not, just to think about it yourself. So here we would typically spend approximately 20 minutes individually or working together within sort of the organization. And then we could also, as a second step, open up for a bit bigger group discussions, and then finally in the full group. So here it depends a bit on how much time you have, but those are quite good guidelines, I would say. So then when we have those top ideas, we move into the next part, or actually we could go to the next slide and look at how this, or what this could look like. So here, if we go back to our example, the truck manufacturer, we then have one idea which is connected to circular supplies and circular packaging. So here you could see then what kind of pain points or inefficiencies that this idea or new opportunity is actually addressing. And then we have an example which is sort of describing what this idea could be like. And just for your sort of sense of how detailed this could be, this is one level of it, and it of course depends on sort of the maturity of the participant and how far they've gotten into this kind of thinking as well. But here is one example, and we have then that it's packaging components and products. They are a big part for the company, as they have over 100,000 of components, and everything needs to be packaged twice, basically. So increasing the usage of recycled material in packaging is an important, as well as then designing the packaging to maximize fill rates and recovery of materials. By doing this, we believe that we could sort of address those pain points and inefficiencies. And then I think we have another example, if we go to the next slide, which is more in terms of returns. This idea is more around a take-back scheme, and that is basically to increase the recovery rate of spare parts at the end of use by making it easier for customers to return the products, and also for the company to take it back, disassemble, and reuse the materials or components. So this is sort of the level that we're at least aiming for in this exercise as well. Then we can perhaps move on to the next slide. And before going into the next exercise, we really want to emphasize that having a clear value case can help organizations to overcome some hesitation that we typically see towards taking on needed investments, for example, when it comes to this area. Because, I mean, investing in circular economy initiatives, that could require a change in how we do business today and how we think about returns and the horizons for that and so on. And as circular economy is quite yet somewhat unexplored, I would say that it's gotten more explored, but for many companies it's quite a bit of a way to go, basically. Then we see some, as I mentioned, typical objections, which could make it hard, basically, to get started on those initiatives, and also to have stamina to not just go through one or the first pilot, but to actually go further. And typical objections or hesitations relates to the need for change. It could be questions or concerns like, okay, we have full books, why should we change something? Things work. Our clients are not asking us to do this, so we wouldn't need to change, right? Or all resources are really tied up. We have no capacity to change. Those are quite common objections that organizations face. So for new circular initiatives, as with many initiatives that require funding, you will need to start by building the value case and looking at how this initiative can generate value. And I think this is super important, and also the skill to sort of communicate this inside the organization is also super important to make it actually happen. And for circular economy, we think that we could have a quite holistic value approach, which you can see here to the figure to the right-hand side of this slide. And I mean, it could be some different dimensions, and this is one way of illustrating this. So here are 4 different dimensions, and it could be like both in terms of increasing the positive, or it could be reducing the negative. It could also be short-term or long-term. So when it comes to increasing the positive and more perhaps of a short-term kind of focus, then we have things in terms of growing revenue. It could be offering new solutions, which brings in new revenue streams, or addressing new customer groups, for example, to also grow the revenue. When we have increasing positive on the long-term side of this axis, it's more perhaps about enhancing brand value. It could be to improve the overall reputation or increasing the customer and employee satisfaction. Those could be things here. And then we'll look into reducing the negative and the perhaps a bit more of a short-term focus. Then we have like the contrary of the above, which is more in terms of managing costs. It could be that we increase the resource productivity, that we identify new suppliers or reduce transactions costs through cross-functional collaboration and so on. And then the final part here is the long-term perspective and reducing the negative, which is then more about mitigating or managing risks to reduce supply chain risks, for example, and reduce the dependency towards volatile commodity markets. But I think we could actually look into the next exercise, which is then about assessing the value potential. So what we do here is, again, perhaps not a big surprise that we use a template for this exercise. And that is basically the right-hand side of the template that we used in the previous exercise. And to support this sort of, okay, how can we think in terms of value, we also have value lever descriptions, which is those screenshots that you see down here on the right-hand side of the slide. So what the participants are asked to do is then to assess value potential of their top 3 business opportunities that they prioritized in the previous exercises, and look at their revenue potential, cost impact, and investment need, and try to sort of rate those, especially in relative sort of, or have a relative mindset, basically. Here we have 20 minutes, but of course, I mean, more detailed business cases and so on, that could be, of course, a quite natural next step. But this is first to get an indication and to be able to compare the different business opportunities. And if we look at the next slide, we can actually just to provide you guys with an example of sort of what those value levers could look like. We have here then, if we consider the circular inputs business model and circular supplies, we've done a little structure here when you can look at cost, for example, or investment. I don't think that we will go through that much details here in regards of time, but there is a lot of different things that you could sort of populate this with, and this is, of course, examples here again. If we just jump to the next slide, we have some examples basically of what it could look like when the participants have filled this in. So what you see here on the sort of left-hand side is the result of the previous exercise, and here on the right-hand side, the participants have basically graded, okay, this the revenue potential of this circular packaging opportunity, it's quite low. But when it comes to cost impact, we could actually have a medium impact. We could replace existing materials with secondary or renewable materials. Or when we look at the investment need, we see that it's quite of a low investment need. And then on the next page, we have another example, or it's the same as before, but we have populated this right-hand side here as well. So this is what the participants basically are asked to do, and this is what it would look like when we're sort of finished with this exercise. And then finally, I know that we're quite short on time now. This is just also to show you what the participants got as a homework, and that is to continue to populate the business model canvas as they gain increased insights. And this is something that we also used in some of the workshops as a starting point, that they were actually asked to share this with the other participants, because there is some good discussion going on when you sort of open your mind a bit on that as well. But with that, I would like to hand over to Sofia again.
Thank you so much, Hanna, for walking us through these exercises that can be used to assess and prioritize business models. It's plenty of exercises, and you can read more about them in the link that we have sent in the chat as well. So hopefully some of you listeners have gotten some inspiration on how you can bring these exercises to other organizations and back to your own organization, as well as some ideas on what could be applicable for your industry and what value it could create. So now we have some Q&A on the agenda, and we have received plenty of good questions in the chat, so thank you so much for that. We won't have time to answer all of them, but we will have time to go through, or we will take as many as we have time with and answer the rest the coming webinars. But I will start with this question, and starting by addressing this to you, Hanna, and then maybe Anna wants to comment as well. So one anonymous person asks, how could you get organizations on board with circularity? What type of conversations need to be happening before jumping into the vision, defining the vision? And how can you get stakeholders to buy into circularity?
I think there is quite a lot of different dimensions to this, and of course it varies quite a lot depending on the type of organization and the overall maturity. But I think one good thing is to showcase some examples of, for example, how this could actually generate increased value. What are actually the benefits of doing this, to try to be quite sort of concrete, perhaps get a little pilot going and so on. So there's a lot of different things that you could do, but I think it's really important to try to be quite tangible and also realistic in what you can do, and then sort of start perhaps a bit small and then scale a bit faster. That I would say are the key things, just to not, I could discuss this forever basically. Anna, would you like to add something?
No, but I think it's a good answer. Typically, we see when companies start with a circular journey or start addressing the circular economy, the need for a shift comes from either customers who looks for more sustainable options, or it comes from regulatory pressures or investor pressure, or just a notion of being more, I guess, protect your license to operate, and basically to be competitive in the future and to avoid risks associated with resource scarcity. So depending a little bit on as Hanna was saying, the type of business you are and what pressure that are most apparent to you. But I think understanding those drivers and understanding what's important for you and articulate that into, again, not seeing the circular economy as see it as an opportunity. I think that's what I'm trying to say, and really try to articulate the value potential of being circular.
Thanks for the answers, both of you. We will have time with one short last question, and then we will make sure to have more time next session to answer your questions. So I will continue with you, Anna, to start this question. Someone is answering or asking, I wonder who should join these sessions, how the group should be assembled, and what is the skill set required? Sorry, Hanna, we could start with you.
Yes, so I think, as I think we mentioned a bit before, but I think it's super important that we try to have cross-functional teams. So people with quite diverse skills, but what's really important, those skills, I mean, they could be in business development, it could be in sustainability, perhaps a bit in tech, but also, you know, the most crucial thing is that we also have mandate to drive this change. So we're not, you know, get stuck in, you know, talking about doing things instead of actually doing things. So I think that is quite good. It's good to have a combination of skills, but also the mandate is quite critical, I would say. Anna, would you like to add?
I think cross-functional is really critical here. I think that we see that the organizations that are successfully accelerating and transforming into circular business are those who are able to integrate that, because you need circular economy, as we saw, across the entire value chain. So from the way that you design to the way you source to the way you sell and the way you offer services and engage with your customers throughout the useful life. So not being integrated across those functions will inhibit you to fully close the circle, and that's where we see companies struggle the most. So typically what we suggest is start small with the group, with different representatives, explore the different ideas, and then you scale and integrate further into those organizations.
Thank you both for those answers. So the next session, we will provide exercises on how to assess what capabilities and technologies that are required for the identified circular opportunities, and looking at what kind of technologies and capabilities that the organization have today and where the gaps are. And then we will go back to this case example that we presented today. And by the end of the next webinar, you will have the tools to support organizations in assessing and analyzing capabilities and technologies that can enable the identified circular opportunities. Until the next session, we would like you to have a look at the exercises that we have gone through today, so which you can reach through the link in the chat, and make sure that you understand them and how to use them. And if any questions pop up during that, please bring that with you to the next session. Usually if one person has a question, there are multiple people having one as well. So with this, I would like to round up this session and thank you to our collaboration partners, Nordic Innovation and Citra. And big thanks to our speakers, and special thanks to you that have participated and been active during this session. See you the 1st of June for the second webinar in this series. Thank you very much. Bye.